strategy the left thinks they're engaging in is an effective strategy. I think it's actually caused more harm than good. I think their rhetoric and their discourse is a lot of times ignorant of the facts. And I think that they go around accusing people of doing things that they themselves engage in. And I was part of that too. I'm trying to do better moving forward. But a lot of people are going to look at this and think, oh, well, then that means she's a right winger. Whatever. You can call me whatever you want. I don't care what you label me as, but
just not birthing person.
Don't call me a birthing person. A person with a uterus. Yeah, exactly.
I don't blame you at all. So
reporting on basically what, you know, some of the risks could be when it comes to transitioning literal kids with puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. And through his reporting, which I'm very sad to say I didn't really come across until this year, I learned that I was wrong about a bunch of other things, right? So for instance, it is a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases, they are not, and they can cause irreparable harm. And look, you might think, okay, but you got to do a balancing act. And if a child or if a teenager has severe gender dysphoria and it would actually be better for that person to go on puberty blocks. Okay, I mean, we should be able to balance that out. But my point here is withholding the information because you don't like the information getting out there ain't the way to go, because that destroys any opportunity for us to actually have a good faith debate about what we should do moving forward. What are the pros and cons? So there's that, you know, all of this stuff it started adding up. Funny because, you know, a lot of them LARP is like anti-capitalist, like revolutionaries or whatever.
LARP, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it's true. And so it's really funny because what they do is they are positioning themselves to attract a very specific niche in audiences, right? So they're going for the purists, the people who like to think of themselves as like far left, communist, socialist, whatever. But like the whole thing is, I mean, you can see it in the various streams. Like they'll talk about things through the lens of we're the most pure, like we're the most sincere in what we're saying, whatever.
The real left,
like,
yeah.
Exactly, we're the real left. So when they do that, what ends up happening is they become more and more extreme in what they are saying, right? In what they claim to believe. And at the heart of that, like what they're actually doing is trying to attract a niche audience for what? To make money. Like I think that protecting, you know, marginalized communities, protecting the transgender community is important. However, when you move out of or move far away from making sure that they are not denied housing, making sure that they're not denied healthcare, when you move into like these more fringe areas of like, I mean, there was a story out of the UK this week, blows my mind. There was an LGBTQ group in the UK who suggested that instead of referring to vaginas as vaginas, because it might be offensive to transgender men, you know, one of the potential replacements or substitutes could be bonus hole. For instance, when Li Fang was reporting on the BLM protests, when he was accurately reporting on the BLM protests and some of the violence that took place during those protests, his own colleagues at The Intercept tried to paint him as a racist. I've known Li Fang for many, many years, since I started working at TYT. Guy doesn't have a racist bone in his body. For them to paint him in that way, I thought was disgusting, and it had a chilling effect, right? The whole point is to intimidate journalists from doing accurate reporting on what's actually occurring on the ground. Then there was what happened to Jesse Singal, which I found disgusting. I didn't know about that until at some point this year. I would say earlier this year.
With the trans stuff? Jesse's been on the show before. Yeah, he's done great.
Jesse Singal is a good faith, I think, critical thinker. I'm subscribed to Blocked and Reported. I have listened to endless podcast episodes from Blocked and Reported. I haven't seen anything from Jesse Singal that communicates to me that he is a transphobe, that he is a bad person. He did straight news reporting on basically what, you know, some of the risks could be when it comes to transitioning literal kids with puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. And through his reporting, which I'm very sad to say I didn't really come across until this year, I learned that I was wrong about a bunch of other things, right? So for instance, it is a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases, they are not, and they can cause irreparable harm. And look, you might think, okay, but you got to do a balancing act. And if a child or if a teenager has severe gender dysphoria and it would actually be better for that person to go on puberty blocks. Okay, I mean, we should be able to balance that out.
It's really, really important in a functioning democracy to have Americans see one another as fellow Americans, as opposed to an identity that needs to be super combative with a different identity. And I think that's what we've kind of turned into. You and I clearly have a lot of disagreements on policy, disagreements on culture, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an awful person. It doesn't mean that I should be afraid of you. If anything, I should prove that I genuinely believe my political views by engaging in these debates. If I can defend what I believe with actual facts, statistics, empirical evidence, well, that only proves that there's good reason to believe in the policies that I'm promoting. And it's easy to be in an echo chamber where everyone already agrees with you, but you're not really being challenged. So I like to be challenged. I like to put my political ideas to the test, and I think this is a good opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
You are legitimizing the other side. And my point is, as long as the other side's coming at me with good faith arguments, they genuinely believe what they're saying, having these debates is important in actually deciphering what you as the viewer believe. Listening to one side. If you're listening to leftist media, liberal media, and you don't get the other side at all, your policy ideas are never going to be challenged. You're not going to hear the other side. And I think it's led to this culture right now where Americans overwhelmingly seem to have difficulty with nuance. Right?
Bo Young Lee, its head of diversity, on leave after she moderated a couple of employee events that made the horrifying mistake of including the perspectives of white female employees. After several years of diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings, making it clear that the inclusion part is really meant to exclude the participation of white women, some employees at Uber didn't take kindly to the sudden paradigm shift. Backlash from Uber workers who felt the topic was insensitive spooked the company's execs, who immediately decided to place Lee on leave. Now, some of their white colleagues saw Karen as a derogatory term. But as we all know, Karen absolutely is a derogatory term. Are we really gonna pretend like it's not? Employees felt the event organizers were minimizing racism and the harm white people can inflict on people of color by focusing on how Karen is a hurtful word, according to messages and an employee who attended the events. Well, it's a derogatory term. That's why it's used in a derogatory sense after someone is perceived to have engaged in bad behavior. Now, look, I'm gonna be honest with you. In the workplace, you shouldn't be calling your coworkers Karens. It's just not a good idea. And by the way, just let that sink in for a moment. Employees were openly angry that they couldn't use a derogatory word against some of their colleagues. This type of work environment is just fantastic. I mean, it's not hostile at all. This is the perfect example of a DEI-related grift that allows economically privileged women to engage in performative acts to feel like they're doing their part to fight racism. Of course, they're not actually doing anything to fight racism at all. And if they want to pay for that, great. But the Race to Dinner ladies have also published books and even put out a movie called Deconstructing Karen. As a result, their simplified portrayal of white women seeps into the public consciousness and discourse. Their words, as void of evidence as they may be, are treated as fact. But don't worry, they also think immigrants to America are automatically anti-black racists as well. If the main problem is systemic racism, why are we all engaging in this toxic witch hunt? Sussing out people we perceive to be problematic does nothing to address racism in our criminal justice system. It does nothing to improve educational curriculum in our schools. And it fails to ensure that people of color have equal opportunities to wealthier white people. We've been conditioned to think that generalizations about entire groups of people is somehow okay, as if it doesn't contradict the fight against racism. We've taken the bait in this extremely successful divide and conquer strategy. And to be honest, I've been struck by how effortlessly callous the online discourse has become. Any out of context viral video that features a conflict with a white woman is automatically considered evidence of a racist act. Even before the dominant online narrative was that this racist pregnant woman tried to steal a bike from a black man and then made herself out to be a victim with her white tears. Her attorney later provided receipts claiming that she in fact paid for the bike, but it felt like no one thought it might be a good idea to just wait and see what the truth was before attacking her. Her employer at Bellevue Hospital was immediately contacted. She was placed on leave pending an investigation. Now her attorney is looking to potentially sue media outlets that propagated false allegations about his client. But we still don't know the full story. And it's better to wait and see how this develops before people try to destroy a stranger's life and livelihood. So, do we feel better about racism in America today? It certainly feels like we're becoming more divided. We're definitely more obsessed with whipping out our phones to surveil one another because God forbid we fail to capture one of our peers in their worst moments. Simply put, I absolutely loathe this crap. And I can't pretend like I'm above it because I engaged in a lot of it myself. And I have deep regrets about that. Karen hunting is a destructive symptom of the powerlessness people feel as they're more atomized and alienated from those around them. It's the abscess that forms from the lack of an organized movement that values the humanity of individuals while fighting institutions that propagate inequality. It's what happens when society fails to understand the critical nature of solidarity. Mayor Eric Adams implied that an elderly white woman who had an important question to ask about unaffordable rents was speaking to him in a racist manner. In fact, he compared her to a plantation owner after she raised concerns about unaffordable rent. Now, before I show you the video and stick around for it, I do want to give you the context so you understand where this woman is. When someone asks you a question that makes you uncomfortable, you could just
treat someone that's on the plantation that you own.
Isn't it so wonderful when someone asks you a question that makes you uncomfortable, you could just weaponize race to shut her down? That's exactly what happened there.
So this one has a little bit of nuance, not a lot. So the little bit of nuance is, yeah, it's true that a lot of times
he has nothing to do with the decision that was made by the Rent Guidelines Board, that he has absolutely no say. I would venture to say that the mayor of the city could, apply some pressure and look out for the people of New York. But he claims that hands off, I have no say in this whatsoever. That's his argument, he insists. Now, I do want to give you some numbers in regard to what Americans are dealing with when it comes to the housing crisis and the unaffordable nature of rent. So this is the highest percentage of New Yorkers facing an affordability crisis in the 23-year history of a study that was done. So according to the study, let's just go back and I'll give you the details on that. There was a study released in April that showed that half of all households in New York don't make enough money to cover basic needs like housing. Okay, so according to the analysis, this is the highest percentage of New Yorkers facing an affordability crisis in the 23-year history of the study, and also marks a significant degradation of life quality since 2021. When the organization's report found that 36% of working age households weren't making ends meet. Listen, people are working their asses off in this country, okay? Working overtime, long hours, barely making enough money to afford housing, okay? They did everything right, they followed all the rules, and they can't even afford to put a roof over their heads. Goddamn right they're angry. And for any politician, anyone who signed up for this, who ran to sit in the seat that Eric Adams is in right now, to deflect and immediately imply that someone is racist because she dare ask you a question in an aggressive way, I'll grant him that, in an aggressive way about this very real and serious issue, it's just infuriating. I'm sick of all of it, okay? I'm sick of these politicians who run for public office, run to be public servants, and end up being anything but.
Yeah, so
who was shot and killed, he had only been on the police force for 1 month. He was a rookie cop. And when he was outside of an LA Fitness gym waiting in his vehicle, he was approached by one of the suspects who then, it's interesting that in that press conference, Gascon mentioned the enhancements that will be added to the charges here because he is not a fan of enhancements, including gun enhancements. So for instance, if someone has committed a crime and while committing that crime, they were in possession of an illegal gun, Gascon does not like to add additional charges related to the illegal gun, which I think is very strange in a state that purports to care so much about gun control. So when you have an opportunity to penalize or prosecute someone who is in possession of an illegal gun, you should maybe take that opportunity. Just saying for a second. Gascon was asked about this, like, what's up with this short sentence? Why didn't your prosecutors, ensure that this guy who committed violent crimes didn't get released the next day after his sentencing? And here's what he had to say. Any questions concerning the actual length of time spent in custody should be directed to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And believe it or not, the Sheriff's Department is right. The District Attorney's Office did allow for a plea deal situation in which the most serious charges pertaining to his violent crimes were dropped. So let's go to the Los Angeles Times. And let me be clear, Los Angeles Times loves to carry water for the failed policies that we've been seeing from George Gascon in Los Angeles. They love it. They defend him all the time. But this is what they wrote. Del Cid had previously been arrested December 8th by Los Angeles County deputies from the Lomita Station booking records show. He was cited and released the next day. Records do not show the alleged offense, but it appeared to be a felony level crime. Okay, so we don't know the details of what that felony was, but he was released the next day after committing this felony crime. Okay, great. The Los Angeles Police Department's Harbor Division arrested Del Cid on February 10th, and he was charged 5 days later with burglary, domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and intimidating a witness. The crimes reportedly occurred on February 9th, records show. All right, these crimes are serious. He didn't just get caught with a baggie of pot, okay? He committed violent crimes. And by the way, the 180-day sentence is super short considering there's like kidnapping involved, domestic violence, intimidating a witness. These are serious crimes. Okay, so the initial sentence, 180 days, I would venture to say pretty short. I know there are people on the left that are like, no, not too short, 180 days, too long. Good that he beat up his wife. Okay, I'm embellishing a little bit, but that's how the left comes across when it comes to these types of stories. 180 days, he didn't even serve the 180 days. He was released the next day. On March 10th, he pleaded no contest to burglary and domestic violence, while the other charges were dismissed. A judge in Long Beach sentenced him to 180 days in jail and 4 years of probation, court records show. He was released the morning after that sentence was handed down, having spent a month behind bars, according to Sheriff's Department booking records. So he actually was able to get away with the assault. Assault with a deadly weapon, that charge was dropped as part of the plea deal that was negotiated by the district attorney's office.
In California, at least, with the phasing out of gas-powered cars, and they'll probably do the same thing with gas stoves, is they just ban the sale of any new gas-powered cars or any new gas stoves. And so the technology that you have in your home, the gas stove that you have in your home, if it breaks, not only are you not able to buy a new one, but it gets increasingly more difficult to just repair it. You get what I'm saying? And so like,
I get it, but that's a bump. That's the normal bumps in the road as you transition to things.
I know, but Cenk, like, don't minimize the financial burdens associated with these things, okay?
No, I'm not.
Because like, I am literally freaking the fuck out about the charging station thing. I'm like, it's gonna cost. We're gonna take out a massive fucking loan to pay for it. We're not getting any help from the fucking government on that.
Did you guys ask? Is there any tax credits? But seriously. Seriously, there's no government help at all to transition you guys?
I don't give a fuck about tax credits.
No, I'm saying for the HOA. Like,
no, there's been no talk of tax credits. I haven't seen anything about tax credits. I should look into it. Maybe there are tax credits, but I don't give a fuck about tax credits because you have to shell out cash, okay? Like,
I want to do something in response to climate change. That is not my issue here. My issue is how, like, we're forced to make all these changes that are a financial burden, a giant inconvenience with like little to no help. And the solution from the government in terms of like, no, you get financial benefits for doing this is fucking tax credits. No, I don't want the tax credits. Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay? Don't tell me this bullshit about how I have to buy like some new fucking thing because the government's forcing me to do it. And then like, after I file my taxes, there's a certain portion of that purchase that might be tax deductible. Like, fuck off. I'm so sick of it. It's just like endless pressure. I can't take it.
Yeah.
Let's not minimize the cost of like actually charging those cars, right? Because here's the other thing. So Gavin Newsom pushes for and succeeds in passing legislation in California that would ban the sale of electric cars at a certain year. I think it is 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not, maybe it's 2035. I don't remember the exact year, but eventually, pretty soon, you're no longer gonna be able to buy a gas-powered car in California. Literally like that same month, Gavin Newsom's like, there's a heat wave and our energy grid really can't handle it. And so I'm just gonna ask you guys, if you have electric vehicles, please don't charge them right now. It's just,
no, you can't do that.
I want to be clear. When I was signing up for criminal justice reform, I thought we were going to do things like reform our prisons. So they're actually, rehabilitating people. I thought we were going to do something about policing. I thought we were going to end qualified immunity. So cops can't get away with shooting down unarmed individuals as they're running away from them. We didn't do that. I thought that we were going to provide funding for actual robust programs that would help nonviolent offenders transition back into society so they live full, happy lives. Didn't do that either. Instead, we're playing this game where we just, by the way, I also never thought that anyone was advocating for the early release of violent criminals, including individuals who have literally been in prison for murdering others. But it turns out California's all about it, and I ain't. I think it's a terrible, terrible way to go about this. This ain't reform. It's all about playing patty cakes with people who are not in any way rehabilitated, who have committed incredibly violent crimes, and in some cases, robbed others of their lives.
So, okay, with the Rittenhouse story, I was gonna cover the trial and I just needed to go back and just like really look at all of the details and remember all the details. So when I do the story, I get the facts right. And then as I'm doing that, I come across a New York Times video. And this was a really well done video that they posted on YouTube that showed you in slow motion, like how everything transpired that night. Mm-hmm. And once you see it for yourself, it's really difficult to argue that in those moments, he was not acting in self-defense. And right. This is an area where, Cenk and I disagree because, if someone's hitting you over the head with a skateboard, that could kill you, And so, Cenk is he's a strong-minded person and he's not one to back down from a fight. So in his mind, someone confronts you with a skateboard, he doesn't see it as a threat, but I do. And Rittenhouse is not a big burly guy who can like defend himself against someone who's like hitting him over the head with a skateboard as he's lying on his back. So right. Once I saw all those details, first of all, I had to convey them to my audience and be honest about what the reality was. The other thing was, there was a lot of misreporting about how Kyle Rittenhouse was in possession of an illegal weapon and that he crossed state lines with that illegal weapon. Okay, yep. So that was a lie. And it's not a lie that I just made up in my mind, right? That was how it was reported initially, which is why I would mention the state lines, but not because, how dare he cross state lines? Anyone in this country has the right to cross state lines. It was because it was reported that he was in possession of an illegal gun, right. And he traveled across state lines with an illegal gun, which is a serious charge. But it turned out that he did not travel across state lines with that weapon.
Yeah, he didn't do that. Yeah, the weapon right. was in the area already. Yeah.
Exactly. He bought it from a friend when he was already in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Better about, first of all, the sources I trust. I make an effort to just be cognizant of the filter bubbles we all exist in, the filter bubbles I exist in. And I've broken through that bubble a little bit to, look at other sources that I typically wouldn't have looked at. And then the other thing that I do now is I just wait. I think the story involving the so-called city bike Karen is a good example of that. The main show, because TYT consists of many different shows, right? The show that I'm the executive producer and host of is the main flagship show, The Young Turks. Mm-hmm. And prior to that story breaking, I had a meeting with my team and I was like, listen, I don't want you guys pitching stories about random individuals in the country who are caught in an out of context video allegedly behaving badly. I think these stories are divisive. I don't think we usually have the full details before we talk about these stories. And honestly, at the end of the day, engaging in these witch hunts is actually causing more division and hate in the country than anything else. So like, if there's a story that's particularly like jarring and you guys really do want to cover it, that's fine. But just understand that we are going to wait. Like, we are not in the business of breaking news. I don't give a shit about being the first in reporting the story or whatever. I want to make sure that when we do, we actually report it correctly and we don't have egg on our face later. Now, there are a bunch of other shows on the network that I have no say over, that I have no control over, who, inaccurately reported on it and had to issue retractions. They had to take videos down and all that stuff. And I just think that was a teachable moment, hopefully a teachable moment for everyone in the company. But certainly, this is an ongoing conversation I have with my team. And luckily, I don't know how I did it. I feel like I found unicorn producers because they're really smart, super open-minded.
I just feel like, what are we doing here? We're taking steps backwards. Why are we doing this?
Also, and I'm not sure like that, teaching kids like, oh, this kid is privileged over you. I'm not sure the psychological effects that's going to have necessarily on the children. And it's kind of
but also like the bullying that commonly takes place on campuses across the country. I mean, you're providing more fodder